You keep walking like that in this cold, and somebody's going to die before sunrise." The words left Cole Mercer's mouth rough as gravel, nearly swallowed by the screaming Montana wind. The woman on the road stopped so suddenly the broken wagon behind her jerked sideways in the snow. For one long second, nobody moved. Snow blew across the empty trail in white sheets, stinging Cole's face beneath the brim of his hat, while his horse shifted uneasily under him. Then one of the children started crying again. Not loud, not spoiled, just tired. The kind of crying that came from a body too cold and too hungry to keep fighting much longer. Cole stared at the scene in front of him, and something deep in his chest twisted hard enough to hurt. 7 children. Lord Almighty. 7. The woman held the wagon rope wrapped around both hands, though her fingers looked so red and raw they barely seemed able to close anymore. Her dark coat was stiff with frozen snow around the hem, and every few seconds her knees threatened to buckle beneath her. The wagon itself looked half-ruined. One wheel dragged crooked through the drifts, leaving behind a jagged line mixed with mud and something darker where the wood had splintered apart. Blankets covered most of the children inside, but the wind kept ripping the edges loose. A little boy near the back couldn't have been older than 4. He was curled against the sideboard without moving, his tiny lips pale blue beneath tangled blonde hair. Beside him, a girl tried weakly to pull the blanket higher over his chest with trembling fingers. The woman finally lifted her head. Her face looked younger than Cole expected and far more exhausted than any face had a right to be. "We're fine," she said, though the words shook apart in the cold. Cole glanced at the boy again. "No, ma'am," he answered quietly. "You ain't." One of the older girls climbed down from the wagon then, boots sinking deep into the snow. Maybe 11 years old. Maybe younger. Hard to tell when hunger had hollowed a child out that badly. She stood in front of the wagon protectively, thin shoulders squared against the storm like she believed she could hold the whole world back if she had to. "Please," she whispered. "My brother won't wake up." Cole felt those words land somewhere he had spent 5 years trying not to feel anything at all. The wind moaned through the pines lining the ridge above them. His horse snorted steam into the dark. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled behind the mountains. Storm getting worse. Fast. The woman lowered her eyes like she already knew what came next. Another rancher turning them away. Another door closing. "We can keep moving," she said softly. "We won't trouble you." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the children. One little girl sat barefoot beneath a blanket with tears frozen silver against her cheeks. Another child coughed weakly into his sleeve. The smallest girl clutched a rag doll, missing one button eye. And the boy in the corner still wasn't moving. Cole swallowed hard enough it hurt. 5 years ago, his cabin had sounded like this. Small boots on wooden floors. Laughter near the fire. A child calling him Papa from the porch at sunset. 5 years ago, he had still been a man capable of hearing joy without feeling pain afterward. The memory hit so suddenly he almost turned the horse around right there. Almost rode away before those ghosts inside him woke all the way up. Then the little barefoot girl looked up at him with frightened blue eyes and whispered, "Mama, I'm cold." Cole closed his eyes briefly against the wind. When he opened them again, he swung down from the saddle without another word. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked toward the wagon. The children went silent instantly, all except the crying baby bundled near the woman's chest. Even the wind seemed quieter somehow. Cole reached for the broken wagon rope with his gloved hand. "Come with me," he said. The road to Cole Mercer's ranch disappeared beneath nearly a foot of fresh snow before they reached the first fence post. Wind screamed across the open prairie hard enough to rock the broken wagon sideways every few yards, but Cole kept pulling without complaint, one gloved hand tight around the rope while the other held the lantern low against the dark. The children followed close behind him now, too, exhausted to speak much anymore. Their boots dragged through the drifts with soft crunching sounds that seemed far too small against the size of the storm surrounding them. Evelyn Hart walked near the back of the wagon with the baby against her chest beneath her coat, one arm wrapped protectively around the smallest girl whenever the child stumbled. Every few minutes she glanced toward Cole like she still expected him to change his mind and leave them out there. He never looked back. The little boy in the wagon still had not opened his eyes. Cole could hear the weak rasp of the child's breathing each time the wind shifted. "Barely there," The older girl stayed beside him the entire way with one hand clutching the blanket over his chest. Snow had gathered in her pale blonde hair until she looked almost ghostly in the lantern light. "What is his name?" Cole finally asked. The girl hesitated before answering. "Samuel, sir." Her voice sounded hoarse from cold. "He got sick 2 days ago." Cole nodded once. "How old?" 5. 5 years old. Same age his own son had been the last winter before the fever came. Cole swallowed hard and kept walking. Ahead of them, the faint outline of his ranch slowly appeared through the storm. First the barn roof, then the fencing, then the warm amber glow from the cabin windows shining against the snow like something half forgotten from another life. One of the younger children gasped softly when they saw it. "Mama," a little boy whispered, tugging Evelyn's sleeve. "There is a real fire." The sound nearly stopped Cole in his tracks. He had not heard wonder in a child's voice on this land in years. The barn doors groaned loudly when he shoved them open against the wind. Horses shifted inside their stalls at once, warm breath steaming through the lantern glow while the storm roared harmlessly outside now. The children froze near the entrance, staring around the barn with wide, exhausted eyes. Hey, dry wood, shelter, safety, things that had probably felt impossible an hour ago. Cole moved quickly toward the empty stall at the far end. "Bring them in," he said quietly. "Out of the cold first." Evelyn guided the children inside carefully while Cole tied his horse near the water trough. The older boys looked at the animals in silent amazement. One little girl reached out slowly toward a chestnut mare, then jerked her hand back nervously. "She is gentle," Cole told her. The child blinked up at him. "Really?" He gave the smallest nod. "She bites only fools." For the first time all night, one of the children smiled. It happened fast and small and gone again almost instantly, but Cole saw it anyway. Saw what that tiny piece of happiness did to the others standing nearby. Evelyn saw it too. Her tired eyes softened for one brief second before exhaustion swallowed the expression again. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole did not answer. He walked to the wagon instead and climbed inside beside Samuel. Up close, the boy looked even worse than before. His skin burned with fever beneath the blanket while cold sweat dampened the curls against his forehead. Cole carefully pressed 2 fingers against the child's neck. Weak pulse. Too weak. Samuel stirred slightly beneath the blanket and let out a faint broken sound. "Mama." Evelyn climbed into the wagon instantly, kneeling beside him despite how badly her own hands trembled. "I am here, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mama is right here." Samuel's eyes fluttered halfway open for barely a second. "Cold," he mumbled weakly. Cole looked toward the cabin windows glowing through the storm beyond the barn doors. Then he reached down without another word and lifted the boy carefully into his arms. Samuel weighed almost nothing. "Come on," Cole said quietly. "We are getting him warm." The cabin door slammed shut behind them, cutting the storm away so suddenly the silence almost rang in Cole Mercer's ears. Warmth rolled through the room from the stone fireplace at the far wall, where thick cedar logs crackled beneath orange flames, and every one of the children stopped moving at once. They stood there frozen in the entryway with snow melting off their coats and boots onto the wooden floor, staring at the fire like they had stepped into church. Samuel whimpered weakly in Cole's arms. The sound snapped the room back to life. Cole crossed the cabin quickly and lowered the boy onto the couch nearest the hearth while Evelyn rushed beside him. "Blankets," Cole muttered, already turning toward the hallway closet. His voice sounded strange after so much silence in the house. Too loud somehow, like the walls themselves had forgotten what conversation sounded like. The children stayed close together near the door while Evelyn knelt beside Samuel, brushing damp curls away from the boy's burning forehead with shaking fingers. "Lucy," she whispered softly to the oldest girl, "help your brothers take off their wet things." Lucy nodded immediately despite how exhausted she looked. She moved through the younger children quietly, helping with buttons stiff from ice, pulling soaked gloves free one finger at a time, gathering scarves and coats into trembling arms. The smallest girl nearly fell asleep, standing up while Lucy worked. Cole returned carrying every blanket he owned. He dropped them beside the fire without ceremony. "Get warm," he said simply. None of the children moved at first. They looked at Evelyn instead, like stray animals waiting to see if shelter was real or if it might disappear the second they trusted it. Evelyn swallowed hard and gave a small nod. That was all it took. The little ones crowded toward the fire carefully, holding hands, eyes wide at the heat touching their faces. One boy stretched both palms toward the flames and let out the tiniest sigh Cole had ever heard. Relief. Pure relief. It nearly broke something in him. He turned away before the feeling could settle too deep. In the kitchen, Cole filled a black iron pot with water and set it over the stove. His cabin suddenly sounded different tonight. Not dead quiet anymore. Small coughing. Soft whispers. Boots scraping wood floors. A baby fussing weakly beneath layers of blankets. He stood motionless beside the stove for a moment, staring at the steam beginning to rise from the pot, while memories moved through the corners of the room like ghosts. 5 years ago there had been noise here too. Laughter near the supper table. Tiny footsteps racing down the hallway. A little boy begging for one more story before bed. Cole gripped the edge of the counter harder than he realized until his knuckles turned pale beneath the lantern light. "Sir." He looked up sharply. Lucy stood near the kitchen doorway holding the little rag doll against her chest. Up close, the girl looked older than any child should. Careful eyes. Quiet movements. The look of someone always listening for trouble before it arrived. "My mama said to thank you," she whispered. Cole looked past her toward the fire where Evelyn sat beside Samuel with the baby sleeping against her shoulder now. One little boy had already fallen asleep curled directly on the rug while another leaned against his sister, trying unsuccessfully to stay awake. Snow still melted slowly from their boots by the door. "Soup will be ready soon," Cole said instead of answering. Lucy nodded once. Then her eyes drifted toward the hallway. "Do you live here all alone?" The question settled heavily into the room. Cole glanced toward the far end of the cabin where a small wooden horse still sat untouched on the bookshelf beside the stairs. Dust covered half of it now. "Yeah," he said quietly after a long moment. Lucy looked like she wanted to ask something else, but stopped herself. The baby suddenly started crying again, thin and tired. Evelyn tried rocking her gently, but her own hands shook so badly she could barely hold the child steady anymore. Cole saw it instantly, saw the exhaustion winning. Without thinking, he crossed the room and crouched beside the couch. "Give her here," he said softly. Evelyn hesitated only a second before placing the baby carefully into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Tiny, warm, frightened. The crying slowed almost immediately against his chest. Cole stared down at the little girl while the firelight flickered softly across her pale face. Then Samuel began coughing hard beneath the blankets, and when Cole touched the boy's forehead again, his expression darkened. The fever was getting worse. The storm battered the cabin windows long after midnight, but inside the fire burned hot enough to turn the room gold. Most of the children had fallen asleep near the hearth now beneath piles of old wool blankets. One little boy snored softly with his cheek pressed against the rug while the smallest girl slept curled against Lucy's side, still clutching the rag doll tight against her chest. The baby rested in a wooden laundry basket lined with quilts beside the couch, finally quiet after nearly an hour of crying. Only Samuel remained awake. Barely. His small body twisted weakly beneath the blankets, while fever sweat dampened the pillow beneath his head. Evelyn sat beside him with both hands wrapped around his tiny fingers, as if she could hold him here through sheer will alone. Cole knelt near the stove, grinding dried willow bark into steaming water the way his mother used to whenever sickness came through the ranch in winter. The bitter smell drifted through the cabin with the scent of smoke and wet wool. "Will it help him?" Evelyn asked quietly. Her voice sounded scraped raw from exhaustion. Cole poured the mixture carefully into a chipped mug. "Maybe." It was the honest answer. She lowered her eyes at that. For a moment neither of them spoke. The cabin creaked softly around them while wind rattled the porch outside. Somewhere upstairs an old loose shutter tapped against the siding in slow, uneven rhythm. Cole carried the mug to the couch and crouched beside Samuel. "Easy now, buddy," he murmured. "Need you to drink a little." Samuel's eyelids fluttered weakly. The boy looked too tired even to lift his own head. Evelyn slipped one arm beneath him carefully while Cole held the mug to his lips a sip at a time. Most of it dribbled down the child's chin anyway. Samuel coughed weakly and turned his face into his mother's shoulder. "No more," he whispered. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, like hearing his voice hurt, and relieved her all at once. "That is enough for now," she whispered back. Cole set the mug aside. Up close, he could see how thin the boy truly was beneath the blankets. Small wrists, hollow cheeks. A child who had not eaten enough in far too long. The same could be said for nearly all of them. Lucy especially. She had fallen asleep upright against the couch arm sometime during the night, still wearing her coat because she never fully believed they were staying. Cole stared at the children in the firelight for a long moment. 7 of them. 7 hungry, frightened kids sleeping inside a cabin that had spent years colder than the storm outside. "You do not have to stay up," Evelyn said softly behind him. "You already did more than enough." Cole leaned back slowly in the chair across from the couch. Not tired. That was not true. He was bone-tired. But every time he closed his eyes tonight, he saw Samuel's pale face in that wagon, or heard the little girl whispering she was cold, or remembered another winter years ago when he had failed to save the people who mattered most. Evelyn watched him quietly through the firelight. "You had children once." It was not a question. Cole's jaw tightened instantly. His eyes drifted toward the staircase without meaning to. A tiny pair of boots still sat there untouched beneath the banister where nobody could see them unless they looked carefully. Evelyn followed his gaze and understood anyway. "I am sorry," she whispered. The room fell silent again except for the fire cracking softly between them. Then Samuel stirred weakly beneath the blankets. "Mama, I am here, sweetheart. Are we leaving tomorrow?" The question hit the room like something fragile breaking. Evelyn froze. Across the fire, Lucy's eyes opened quietly, though she pretended to stay asleep. Even the younger children seemed to hold still, listening. Samuel looked between his mother and Cole with fever-glazed eyes. "Because if we are leaving," he whispered weakly, "can we stay till morning first?" Cole looked down at the little boy for a very long moment. Then he reached forward and pulled another blanket gently over Samuel's shoulders. "Nobody is going anywhere tonight," he said softly. Samuel relaxed almost immediately beneath the blankets. But Lucy kept watching Cole silently from across the fire, her tired eyes suddenly filled with something far more dangerous than fear. Hope. Morning arrived slowly over the ranch beneath a sky the color of cold steel. Snow still clung to the fence posts and pine branches outside the cabin windows, but the storm itself had finally passed, leaving behind the deep, aching quiet that always followed hard weather in Montana. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low too, glowing red coals while 7 sleeping children lay scattered across blankets and quilts like tiny survivors washed ashore after a flood. Cole Mercer stood alone at the stove before sunrise, pouring oats into a cast-iron pot while coffee simmered nearby. The cabin smelled different this morning, warmer somehow, not just from the fire. He glanced toward the couch, where Samuel still slept beneath layers of blankets. The fever had eased a little during the night. Not gone, but better. The boy's breathing no longer sounded quite so fragile. Evelyn had finally fallen asleep sitting upright beside him sometime before dawn with the baby curled against her chest beneath one of Cole's old flannel shirts. Even sleeping, she looked exhausted enough to break a man's heart. Lucy was the first child awake. Cole noticed her immediately because she did not move like children normally did after waking. No stretching, no yawning. She opened her eyes and instantly checked every person in the room one by one, as if counting to make sure nobody had disappeared during the night. Only after she saw all her brothers and sisters safe did she finally relax. Barely. Cole handed her a tin cup of warm water without a word. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Her manners sounded so careful it hurt to hear. A moment later the little ones began waking too. Small, sleepy voices filled the cabin while blankets shifted and tiny socked feet patted across the floorboards. One little boy stopped dead in front of the stove staring at the pot. "Is that breakfast?" he asked softly like he could not quite believe it. Cole nodded once. The child looked genuinely stunned. "For us." Before Cole could answer, the smallest girl tugged carefully on his coat sleeve. "Mister." He looked down. She held up the rag doll, missing one eye. "Her name is Daisy." Cole studied the doll solemnly. "Looks tough." The girl giggled quietly for the first time. The sound startled everybody in the room, including herself. Evelyn woke at that exact moment and looked around in confusion before panic flashed briefly across her face. Then she saw all 7 children safe near the stove, and her shoulders sagged with relief so deep it looked painful. Samuel blinked weakly up from the couch. "Mama, I am here, sweetheart. It smells good." Evelyn covered her mouth suddenly as tears filled her eyes. She turned away quickly, embarrassed by them, but Cole saw anyway. saw what one warm room and one simple breakfast meant after 2 hungry nights. He looked down at the oats before speaking quietly. There is more in the pantry. Evelyn stared at him. More? He shrugged slightly. Enough. The children gathered around the small table while bowls of oatmeal steamed in the morning light. Nobody spoke much at first. They ate slowly and carefully, like children who had learned food could disappear if you trusted it too quickly. Samuel managed only a few bites before falling asleep again against Lucy's shoulder. Cole sat near the window drinking coffee in silence while snow drifted softly beyond the glass. Across the table, one of the younger boys finally looked up and whispered, "Mama." Evelyn brushed hair gently from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart." The little boy glanced toward Cole before speaking quietly enough that he probably thought nobody else could hear. "Do you think maybe God remembered us?" The room went very still after that. Cole lowered his coffee cup slowly while the fire cracked softly behind him. And for the first time in years, the old empty cabin no longer felt empty at all. 3 days passed before the children stopped flinching every time somebody knocked snow from their boots outside the cabin door. By then the storm had cleared completely, leaving the ranch buried beneath glittering white fields that stretched for miles beneath a pale winter sun. Smoke curled steady from the chimney each morning now, and small footprints covered the yard between the cabin and barn in every direction. Cole Mercer found himself watching those tracks more than he wanted to admit. The ranch sounded alive again. Tiny voices drifted through the house at sunrise. Laughter echoed from the barn whenever the younger boys tried feeding carrots to the horses. Even Samuel had started sitting up beneath his blankets long enough to complain about staying indoors. "I am not sick anymore," he grumbled. Weakly from the couch that afternoon, while Lucy folded laundry nearby. "You fainted trying to drink water yesterday," Lucy answered without looking up. "That was one time." Cole hid the smallest trace of a smile behind his coffee cup. Samuel noticed immediately. "You smiled?" the boy whispered accusingly. "No, I did not." "You did too." The younger children turned instantly at that announcement like startled birds. One little girl gasped dramatically. "Mama," she whispered, "he knows how." Evelyn pressed her lips together trying not to laugh, but the sound escaped anyway, soft and warm and sudden enough to fill the whole room. Cole stared down into his coffee like it had personally betrayed him. For a moment the cabin felt strangely easy. Safe. Then the knock came at the door. Every child froze instantly. Silence crashed over the room, so fast the fire suddenly sounded deafening. Lucy pulled the smallest children closer without even thinking about it, while Evelyn stood, so quickly her chair scraped hard across the floorboards. Cole was already moving toward the door. He saw the fear in Evelyn's face before she managed to hide it. Not normal worry. Real fear. Outside stood 2 men beside a dark wagon near the fence line. Heavy coats. City boots. One tall and narrow-faced. The other thick around the shoulders with a cigar clenched between his teeth despite the cold. Neither looked like ranch hands. Cole opened the door only halfway. "Afternoon," the taller man said. His eyes slid immediately past Cole toward the cabin interior. "We are looking for a widow traveling with 7 children." Behind Cole, one of the little girls whimpered softly. The man heard it too. His smile changed after that. Not kinder. Sharper. "Looks like we found them." Cole did not move from the doorway. "Who is asking?" "Name is Walter Grin. This here is Dean Fuller. We have business with Mrs. Hart." Evelyn stepped slowly into view behind Cole before he could stop her. The second those men saw her, all warmth vanished from their faces completely. Dean removed the cigar from his mouth. "Mrs. Hart," he said flatly, "you gave folks a long chase." The children crowded tightly behind Evelyn now. Samuel looked confused. The younger ones looked terrified. Lucy looked ready to run. Cole noticed all of it. Walter reached into his coat slowly and pulled out folded papers. "Your husband owed money before he died," he said. "A considerable amount." Evelyn's face drained of color. "I told you already," she whispered. "I do not have anything." Walter's eyes drifted toward the cabin, toward the children. "Funny thing is," he replied softly, "we heard different." Cole felt the room tighten behind him, felt every frightened child go perfectly still. Then Dean looked directly at Lucy and smiled in a way that made Cole's stomach turn cold. "That oldest girl," he said casually. "She's still carrying the notebook?" Evelyn stopped breathing for one terrible second. Cole heard it, saw it, And suddenly he understood these men had not followed a widow through a blizzard over unpaid debts. The room stayed silent long after the two men rode away from the ranch. Snow creaked beneath their wagon wheels until even that sound disappeared into the white hills beyond the fence line. Still nobody inside the cabin moved. Lucy stood near the fireplace, clutching the edge of her sweater so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The younger children gathered around Evelyn in frightened silence, while Samuel stared toward the door with wide, confused eyes from beneath his blankets. Cole Mercer shut the door slowly against the cold and slid the lock into place. The metal clicks sounded far too loud in the room. "Mama," one of the little boys whispered. "Who were they?" Evelyn could not answer. She sank into the nearest chair instead and covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Cole stood near the window watching the empty road outside. His jaw looked carved from stone. "Lucy," Evelyn whispered after a long moment. "Go upstairs with the little ones." Lucy did not move. "Mama, please." The girl swallowed hard and nodded. One by one she gathered the younger children quietly. Tiny frightened hands clung to her sleeves as she led them toward the staircase. Samuel tried to climb off the couch too. "I want to stay with Mama." "Easy now, buddy," Cole said gently. "You still got fever." Samuel looked ready to argue before a coughing fit stopped him cold. Cole crouched beside him immediately while Evelyn rubbed the boy's back softly until his breathing steadied again. Upstairs, floorboards creaked as the children disappeared into the bedroom at the end of the hall. A few seconds later the cabin fell silent except for the fire. Evelyn stared into the flames for a very long time before finally speaking. "My husband worked for the railway office before he died," she said quietly. "Bookkeeping, shipping records, land contracts." Cole remained near the window listening without interrupting. One night, he came home different. Scared. Her voice cracked slightly on the word. He said some men had been stealing land from families who could not fight back. Widows, ranchers, farmers drowning in debt. Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. Evelyn twisted her wedding band slowly around her finger. "My husband found proof. Names, signatures, payments." She looked toward the staircase. "He wrote everything down in a notebook." Upstairs, a floorboard groaned softly beneath tiny footsteps. Lucy listening. Of course she was. "The notebook belongs to your daughter?" Cole asked quietly. Evelyn nodded. "The night before my husband died, he gave it to Lucy and told her never to let anybody take it." The fire cracked sharply between them. "How did he die?" Evelyn closed her eyes. "They said it was an accident." The way she said the words made it clear she no longer believed them. Cole looked back toward the snow outside. "And those men, they have been following us ever since." Her voice dropped lower now. "Every town, every boarding house, every church." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks then, though she tried desperately to hide them. "I thought if we kept moving long enough, maybe they would stop caring." Cole stared at her for several seconds before asking quietly, "Why come this far north?" Evelyn gave a weak, broken laugh at that. "Because I ran out of places to go." Upstairs, a small child suddenly started crying softly. Another frightened by voices downstairs. Lucy's quiet shushing drifted through the ceiling. Cole listened to it in silence. Then he walked toward the fireplace and rested one hand against the mantel. "You should leave," Evelyn whispered suddenly, "before they come back." Cole looked at her. "This is not your fight." He glanced toward the staircase again, where 7 exhausted children now hid upstairs afraid of footsteps outside the door. The old familiar emptiness inside him stirred uneasily. 5 years alone had taught him how to survive pain. But those kids had dragged life back into this cabin whether he wanted it or not. He looked at Evelyn carefully. "You planning to run again?" She lowered her eyes without answering. Cole nodded once like that told him everything he needed to know. Then he reached for his coat hanging beside the door. Evelyn's head lifted sharply. "Where are you going?" Cole opened the door just enough for cold air to spill across the floorboards. "Barn," he said quietly. "Need to make sure my horses are ready." And for the first time since she arrived at the ranch, Evelyn Hart realized the silent cowboy was preparing for something far more dangerous than another snowstorm. The ranch went quiet after sunset in a way that made every sound feel important. Wind brushed softly against the cabin walls while snow slipped from the barn roof in heavy frozen clumps outside. Upstairs, the younger children finally slept after hours of frightened whispers and questions Lucy could not answer. Only Samuel remained awake downstairs beneath his blankets near the fire, watching Cole Mercer lace a saddle onto his horse through the frost-covered barn window. "You are leaving?" the boy asked softly. Cole glanced back from the doorway. "Just for a little while." Samuel pushed himself upright slowly despite the fever still lingering in his pale face. "Those men are coming back, huh?" The question sat heavily in the room. Evelyn looked up sharply from the kitchen table where the notebook lay wrapped inside an old towel between her trembling hands. Cole walked back toward the couch and crouched beside Samuel. "Listen to me, buddy," he said quietly. "Nobody is taking you anywhere." Samuel searched his face carefully like children do when they are deciding whether grown folks are telling the truth. "Promise." Cole hesitated only a second. "Yeah," he said softly. "I promise." The little boy relaxed back against the pillow after that, exhausted eyes slowly closing again. Upstairs, one of the younger girls cried out softly in her sleep. Lucy's gentle voice answered almost immediately through the ceiling. Cole stood slowly. He had spent years avoiding promises because promises could break a man clean in half when life took them away. But hearing himself give one to that little boy had stirred something dangerous inside him. Something warm. Something alive. Evelyn rose from the table, clutching the towel wrapped around the notebook. "You should take this," she whispered. Cole looked down at it without reaching. "No, if they come back, they will." The certainty in his voice chilled the room. Evelyn's hands tightened around the notebook. "Then they will search the cabin." Cole stepped closer and carefully folded her fingers back around it. "You keep hold of it." She stared at him. "Why?" He glanced toward the staircase where 7 sleeping children rested beneath his roof. "Because your daughter already carried it this far." For a moment, Evelyn looked like she might cry again. Instead, she swallowed hard and nodded once. A sudden sound outside froze both of them instantly. Hoofbeats. Fast. Too fast. Cole moved before the second sound even came. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed a rifle hanging above the fireplace, while Evelyn rushed toward the stairs. The hoofbeats thundered into the yard hard enough to shake snow loose from the porch roof. Then came shouting. Men's voices. More than 2 this time. Samuel jerked awake, coughing while upstairs the children started crying in confusion. Cole shoved the rifle into Evelyn's hands. "Take the kids to the root cellar," he said sharply. Her eyes widened. "Cole, now." The front door rattled violently beneath a heavy fist. Lucy appeared halfway down the stairs, clutching the smallest girl against her chest, while the younger boys crowded behind her terrified. Another bang shook the cabin. "Mrs. Hart," a voice shouted from outside. "Walter Grin, open this door before somebody gets hurt." Every child froze at the sound. Cole stepped between them and the entrance without hesitation. The firelight flickered across his face while snow blew hard against the windows behind him. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot fight all of them." Cole worked the rifle lever once with a cold metallic snap that silenced the room completely. "Good thing," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the shaking door. "I do not plan on fighting alone." Then from somewhere beyond the barn came the sharp, distant sound of another horse galloping hard across the frozen ranch road toward the cabin. The horse thundered into the yard beneath a spray of snow and stopped hard beside the porch just as another blow slammed against the cabin door. Every child upstairs cried out at once. Cole Mercer lifted the rifle slightly, ready, while Evelyn gathered Samuel against her chest near the staircase. Then a familiar voice shouted through the storm. "Cole, open up before these fools freeze solid out here." Cole blinked once in surprise before unlocking the door. Sheriff Ben Turner stepped inside wearing a heavy wool coat dusted white with snow, his silver badge catching firelight near his collar. 2 deputy marshals followed behind him carrying long rifles across their backs. Walter Grin's expression soured immediately from the porch. "Sheriff," he snapped. "This is legal business." Ben Turner pulled off his gloves slowly and looked around the cabin at the frightened children huddled near the stairs. His weathered face hardened instantly. "Looks to me like you brought trouble to a house full of kids," he said flatly. Walter stepped forward holding out folded papers. "The widow is in possession of stolen property tied to an active investigation." Evelyn clutched the notebook tighter beneath her coat. Ben did not even glance at the papers. "Funny thing about investigations," he replied calmly. "I already got one of my own." Silence fell hard across the porch. Cole looked at the sheriff sharply. Ben reached inside his coat and removed another stack of documents tied with string. 3 counties been reporting forged land transfers for over a year now. Dead ranchers. Missing contracts. Families pushed off property. They owned fair and square. Walter's face slowly drained of color. You got no proof. Actually, Ben said quietly, I do. His eyes shifted toward Evelyn for one brief second. Seems a certain railroad bookkeeper kept real careful records before he died. Upstairs, Lucy appeared halfway down the staircase, clutching the notebook against her chest. Nobody had even seen her move. Walter stared at the girl like a starving wolf spotting food. Cole stepped instantly between them. Easy now, Ben warned sharply without taking his eyes off Walter. You move 1 inch toward that child, and these deputies are hauling you out face first through the snow. The room held perfectly still after that except for the fire crackling softly behind Cole. Finally, Walter lowered his eyes. Dean muttered something under his breath near the wagon outside, but neither man argued again. Ben nodded once toward the deputies. Escort these gentlemen off the property. The deputies stepped forward immediately. A few seconds later, the porch emptied beneath the sound of boots crunching through snow. Then silence returned at last. Real silence this time. The kind that comes after danger finally passes by. Evelyn sat down slowly at the kitchen table, like her legs no longer knew how to hold her up. Lucy stood frozen on the staircase, still gripping the notebook with both hands. Samuel looked between everyone in confusion. Are the bad men gone? Ben Turner glanced toward the child and softened slightly. Yeah, buddy, he said. They are gone. The little boy nodded sleepily and rested his head against Evelyn's shoulder. One by one, the younger children began creeping downstairs again, drawn by the sudden calm in the room. The smallest girl wandered straight toward Cole and wrapped both tiny arms around his leg without warning. Cole froze completely. The child pressed her cheek against his coat and whispered, You kept your promise. Something inside the silent cowboy broke open then. Not loudly, not all at once. Just enough for warmth to finally reach the place's grief had frozen solid years ago. Months later, spring covered the ranch in green grass and wildflowers. The broken wagon was gone now. In its place stood a long clothesline behind the cabin, swaying with tiny shirts and patched overalls beneath warm Montana sunlight. Children's laughter drifted across the fields while Samuel chased chickens near the barn stronger every day. Lucy sat on the porch steps reading aloud to the younger ones from a new notebook Ben Turner had brought her from town. And inside the kitchen, Evelyn stood beside Cole rolling dough for supper while the baby slept peacefully against his shoulder like she belonged there. Maybe she did. The old cabin no longer sounded lonely. Boots thudded across the hallway upstairs. Little voices argued over pie crusts. Somebody laughed near the barn loud enough to startle the horses. Cole looked out across the ranch slowly, sunlight warming his face through the open window. Then the smallest girl ran into the kitchen barefoot and grinning. Papa, she called happily. Samuel fell in the creek again. Cole stood perfectly still at the word. Across the table, Evelyn smiled softly through shining eyes. Outside the window, the Montana wind moved gently through the grass around a ranch that finally felt like home again. In this emotional frontier story from Tales of American West Cowboys, a silent cowboy discovers a desperate widow dragging 7 freezing children through a brutal Montana snowstorm with nowhere left to go. What begins as one act of mercy slowly becomes a powerful journey about healing, sacrifice, trust, and finding family in the most unexpected place. As danger closes in around the frightened mother and her children, the lonely rancher must decide whether protecting them is worth risking the quiet life he buried himself inside years ago. Filled with emotional storytelling, snowy ranch atmosphere, heartwarming survival moments, and unforgettable family bonds, this cinematic Western drama captures the spirit of Tales of American West Cowboys through themes of compassion, redemption, and hope. Fans of heartfelt frontier stories will experience the warmth of firelit cabins, the struggle of abandoned families, and the emotional transformation of a broken cowboy whose empty home slowly comes alive again with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the sound of children finally feeling safe. Tales of American West Cowboys delivers another deeply moving Western narrative where grief, courage, and love collide beneath the harsh beauty of the American frontier, while a widow carrying dangerous secrets discovers that kindness still exists in a world that nearly destroyed her family. With powerful emotional dialogue, cinematic winter scenery, and a touching ending that celebrates belonging and second chances, this unforgettable story embodies everything audiences love about tales of American West cowboys and the timeless emotional storytelling tradition of tales of American West cowboys. Character 1. A white male cowboy in his early 40s with weathered skin, light stubble, and tired eyes, wearing a dark wool coat, flannel shirt, leather gloves, denim pants, and a classic Western hat, standing front-facing in a snowy Montana ranch setting. Realistic cinematic photography style, soft natural lighting, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.